Thanks so much for your time this afternoon. So we saw those record highs in the US markets after a pause of about a week. What else is driving it besides those trade talks?
Well, I think the trade talks are the primary reason we are seeing this improvement coming through. Still, at the same time, the US economy remains reasonably strong. We seem to be on either a rate cutting or a halting of the rate hiking cycle at the very least in the US, which seems to be quite positive for markets. And as the President of the United States keeps on saying, we're hitting all-time highs almost every second day. So it's a bit of a momentum thing going on in the US right now. Whether or not we can see that falling into next year, I'm not so sure. I think there's a lot of headwinds hitting global markets in 2020. But right now, I think everything is looking to basically push markets to new highs.
Okay, so we know that in Asia the markets are mixed, also attributed to those trade talks. What's the difference there?
Well, I mean, the Hong Kong situation is very special. I mean, of course, everyone should know about the protests happening in Hong Kong for several months now. And if you watch, the violence happening there, I mean, it's basically the police are being quite brutal, and the protesters are responding in kind almost. I mean, I've seen protesters with things like, Molotov cocktails and bow and arrows and stuff, So Hong Kong, I think at the moment is its own special case. The rest of Asia looked a little bit more positive. I think the Chinese have been more badly affected by this trade war, talk or the trade war tariffs than the US has been to a certain extent, but they also have the greater ability to go in and actually push things higher. So they all depend not just on the trade talk being resolved, but they also depend to a certain extent on the kind of stimulus they're getting from the Chinese government.
Okay, we saw the rand weakening a little bit earlier on against the US dollar, and that's said to be in part because of the IMF pronouncements on South Africa, the weakening economy and the credit risk rating.
Yeah, I mean, and also the S&P outlook, downgrade, and I think also following off the Moody's thing as well. I mean, the Moody's thing was a little special because I think after Tito Mbowene's speech, the markets were very nervous. The currency weakened dramatically beyond 15. But once we just got an outlook, downgrade as opposed to a straightforward downgrade, the market relaxed a bit and we got a bit stronger. But I think the fact of the matter is that it's pretty clear right now that not only are we likely to see a downgrade from Moody's overall, we may see further pushes into junk status by the other two major ratings agencies, and that's going to be quite difficult for us. I mean, it's one thing to be just below investment grade, and therefore there's one turnaround puts it back into investment grade. But if you're 2 or 3 notches below, it takes a long time to actually climb back. And even if you start the recovery right now and you start the process of actual improvement, it's going to take a number of periods before we see the rating agency being able to actually put you back into investment grade. So I think that's quite a negative for the country at the moment. The IMF, I think, further reinforces that the growth outlook for 2020, even according to the Reserve Bank right now, is about 1.4%. And quite frankly, if you go back over the last 5 years, look at South Africa's growth rate based on what the Reserve Bank says at this time of the year ahead of things, you can pretty much cut it in half and be quite close to the actual numbers. So I'm suspecting next year we'll have great difficulty beating 1% overall growth.
Sure, that's a scary prospect. Let's go now to some company news. Discovery falling around 4%. Why is that?
Discovery's been very volatile recently. Of course, about any kind of confidence or lack of confidence, for instance, in the banking sector, lack of confidence in the market affects Discovery, as well as any kind of news on the NHI. So it's been very volatile, but it's recovered. The last time I checked, it was down just about 1.7%, and I've seen really big moves in Discovery over the last year or so. Quite strong daily moves, but big reversals happening overall.
Okay. If I'm looking behind you, Vivasi, ABSA Group is down, Nedbank Group is down. Banking stocks overall seem to be lower. What's happening there?
Well, banks basically depend on confidence, and they have one more, and also depend on the economy as well. So banks are things that are geared to the economy. The economy does well, banks do well. They don't basically do well in bad economies usually. And so we do see a situation where when we have these SP downgrades, where we have this negative news around the growth rate in the country, that's going to be very badly felt by the financial sector more than some of the other sectors. Resources, for instance, don't really mind because they aren't really dependent on the South African economy. And in fact, a currency weakening in South Africa improves the profitability of a gold mine, for instance. But the banks definitely depend a great deal on confidence, and right now we're seeing confidence kind of dip, especially after the downgrades, like I said, and the outlook changes that we are seeing.
Let's go to 2 companies that seem to be suffering, specifically when it comes to Zimbabwe. Pepkor saying they lost about 70 million rand. They're going to be exiting Zimbabwe. And Nampak, also affected by business in Zimbabwe, reportedly losing around 2 billion rand.
Yeah, look, I mean, Zimbabwe is obviously not a great place to invest in at the moment. There was serious hope after the death of Robert Mugabe and his replacement initially, but certainly after his death, that we would see a turnaround in that economy. Unfortunately, as we have all seen, it wasn't really a replacement. The people that were running the show before are kind of still running the show right now without that titular figurehead, and so we haven't really seen a turnaround in the economy. Great potential in Zimbabwe, but right now growth rates and other factors, and especially the currency, a great deal of worry. Pepco apparently has done reasonably well. They say they haven't seen a market share loss among any of their brands over the last period, which does seem to show that they are doing reasonably well in terms of maintaining their market share. But unfortunately for them, the country as a whole has been under pressure, so the economy is not growing. So even the market share is doing reasonably well, there's not that much market to invest in. And Nampak, I think Nampak has had some issues. They've also had that Angola tax issue regarding forex losses, so that's also affecting them. And I think right now Nampak has come under a great deal of scrutiny just because of the appointment of the new Eskom head.
Viv Govender from Rand Swiss, thanks so much for your time and your analysis on Point this afternoon, coming to us from our Johannesburg Stock Exchange studios. It's time for a short break.